Next we got another little banger. Favorite children were chosen, ripping out my heart and stomping on it, but like in a good way. Oh, I think this book is kind of like one of my soulmates. It's a zinger, like an uppercut to the jaw in the best way possible. Oh. Hi, I'm Sam. There's quite literally no one asking me to do this, but this is the reason I made a booktube channel, so I could talk about my favorite and least favorite reads of the year. So today I want to tell you about my 22 best reads of 2022. So I'm going to start with number 22, and then we're going to move all the way to number 1. And these are in an order. I painstakingly put them into an order. It was difficult. It was like choosing my favorite children, but choices were made. Favorite children were chosen. Okay, so coming in at number 22 is Milk Fed by Melissa Broder. So you can see just from the sticky tabs, this little gal is very heavily annotated. So this is about a young 20-something who works in LA who has an eating disorder. So she has a lot of restrictions around the foods that she eats, the amount of calories that she consumes. She has a really strict and rigorous exercise regimen. And she meets this other woman at her froyo shop that she likes to go to. She basically becomes infatuated with this woman, and as her relationship with this woman changes, so too does her relationship with food. Definitely one of the funniest books I've read this year. This was my first time reading Melissa Broder, and I'm really excited to read more from her. I want to read you a couple excerpts because this one literally made me laugh out loud. So we're at a point in the story where our main character, Rachel, has decided to relax her food restrictions. So she was kind of like walking around town trying to hit up all these spots that she has always seen and been intrigued by and wanted to try but wouldn't allow herself to. I stopped inside Dr. Burrito. I had seen people eating burritos in there so casually, and I wondered how they did it. Just calmly ate something so fattening. The burritos always looked delicious, like warm babies swaddled up in tight blankets. I'd wanted to take a burrito and hold it to my cheek, or put it over my shoulder and soothe it. I wasn't physically ready to consume my baby yet, so I decided to just carry it. There, sweet bundle of beans and cheese. You are wanted. That's just like baseline pretty funny because I also feel like I get that way with my food. I enjoy food quite a bit. There's also like these other really poignant, profound parts. Our main character has a pretty complicated relationship with her mother. So she says, I thought about how I used to watch my mother sleep sometimes, how innocent she looked with her hands tucked under the pillow. In those moments, I saw her as a little girl, and I felt that nothing was her fault, just a chain of fears and feelings passed down from generation to generation. In those moments, I thought, you can show her how to love you better by being loving to her. But it was easier to be loving when the person was asleep. Yeah, that is really good. Really good. As I said, this was my first Melissa Broder. This will not be my last. This was a slay. Okay, number 21. We have sort of similar themes. So this is one that was actually published this year, and that is New Animal by Ella Baxter. Just a fantastic cover. This is actually about a main character who works at a family mortuary business. She does like the makeup on all of the dead bodies. She experiences an unexpected loss in her family and cannot cope. I've realized this year that I really enjoy stories that explore grief and have characters moving through grief because it's so different for everyone. I think grief makes you kind of insane, honestly. Our main character cuts off contact with her family and she flees to a different country where her birth father lives and basically stumbles into the local BDSM community. She's basically just like trying to find something, literally anything that will make her feel better. It's just really entertaining to follow her. So this was very much like a messy family, the trials and tribulations of grief, how grief looks different for different people, the pain of existing and living, but also the pain of dying and having someone you love die. I just really liked this. You can obviously see another highly annotated girly read this book because it was really good and I really liked it. Next we have kind of a surprise. This one was unexpected because I'm normally not a young adult girly. Another thing I've learned about myself this year, I can enjoy young adult if it's specifically about witchy women taking revenge and or demanding that they be treated equally, even if that means resorting to violence. That book is Ecstasia by Claire Legrand. This one was also published this year, so like look at me with all these new releases. Who is she? But this is about old-timey, what could be like a town in colonial United States. The village is very like what you would expect from a colonial village. We hate women, women are property, etc., etc. Our main character is very much like, yep, I have a lot of internalized misogyny, and I'm just going along with that because the elders wouldn't steer us wrong. And then a bunch of men start getting picked off and like killed in the village. So she basically sets out to try and fix what's going on, to try and save the men. And then some witchy stuff happens and there's like a revenge arc. To convince you to read this, there's a scene where a man who attempts to sexually assault another girl in the village literally gets every bone in his body broken by these witches with the power of magic and female rage. If that doesn't convince you to read this, I don't know what will. Next is another one that kind of surprised me. So this is an author I've read before. I liked his stuff, but I wasn't like, this is a new fave author. But this one was like, oh, well, okay, hello to you too. So that is We Can Never Leave This Place by LaRocca. This was a 5-star banger. Basically, our main character is this young girl whose father dies unexpectedly / violently. And then the mother cannot cope, starts acting really weird, starts inviting all of these like kind of weird people into their home with the idea that they're gonna protect them from weird, vague dangers outside. But she's like, okay, but these people you're letting in the house actually seem kind of dangerous. This kind of reminded me, not in like plot, but just like the feeling of not having control or any say over your life, who comes into your home, and you have no control over maintaining your own sense of safety. This reminded me kind of the movie Mother. So if you liked that movie, maybe give this a try. I think people who didn't like this were wanting more of a straight up horror. This was more like a dark fairy tale, which I loved. I literally did not see the ending coming, which maybe I'm just dumb. I don't know. But I was just like along for the ride. I was so enraptured by it. I didn't even have any headspace to like try and guess ahead what was gonna happen. I was just so like, yeah, take me on this ride. I'm buckled in. Let's go. I'm ready. I think you should read this. Even if you've read Eric LaRocca before and you didn't like him, or if you're not a horror girly, I think this would be like a kind of a good entry point. It is more like a dark fairy tale. So read this, please, and then tell me how you like it. Next is one that kind of surprised me because I read another book by this author and I didn't like it, but I really liked this one. Obviously, it's on this list, and that is Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay. I read Head Full of Ghosts by him, didn't like it. Cabin at the End of the World, however, was a slay. So this is about a pair of husbands who go to this like cabin for a vacation with their adopted daughter Wen. They're just like chilling, and then this ragtag group of strangers shows up and is like, hey, the world is ending, and like one of you 3 in your family has to stop the apocalypse from coming. So what I loved about this is I love home invasion horror. I love a horror where it kind of keeps you guessing, okay, are these people insane? Or is the apocalypse actually happening? So many really fun horror elements that I really enjoy. And then kind of like as the story progresses, you kind of feel like you're going crazy too, because what is the truth? And I just got so invested. There were a few genuinely shocking moments in this too. Really wasn't expecting it, and then I was like, whoa, that was really good. Again, if you've read Paul Tremblay and you don't like him, you should still read this. Or if you're like, gee, I wonder which Paul Tremblay book I should start with, read this one. This one was really good. I didn't like Head Full of Ghosts. Maybe you will, maybe you do, that's fine. Love that for you. But Cabin at the End of the World is a banger for me. Okay, next we got another little banger. I don't know why I keep saying that as if all these books aren't amazing, because obviously they're on my best of 2022. Anyway, this is a kind of older book, but it's new to me. But that is Come Closer by Sarah Gran. She's a shorty, but she packs a punch. Basically, this is like possession horror. Kind of, again, there's that ambiguity of like, is our main character just like kind of going a little crazy, or is she actually becoming possessed? As the story progresses, she basically just becomes more and more unwell, or does she need an exorcism? You know, this is a pretty bleak story. So I love a bleak story, but if you're not a bleak girly, probably won't like this. But I want to read a little excerpt to you because this is probably like one of my favorite sections of any book I've ever read. It's a zinger. I was waiting for a train on my way back from the Fitzgerald house. It was a little too late to be there, waiting alone for a train. The platform was empty except for myself and one other person, a man. I didn't like the look of him. He had the wrong expression on his face. He was walking towards me. I wanted to turn around and leave, go back to the token booth and try to call a taxi, but I didn't. Instead, I walked towards the man, meeting him halfway. "Just missed the train?" I heard myself ask. He shrugged. I could not believe I was engaging this man in conversation. "I hate that," I said, especially at night. Especially at night when you're waiting for a train and there's someone there. And you never know. I mean, in the city, you just never know who you're dealing with. They might have a knife or a gun or whatever. They might, I don't know, be the kind of person who hates men who hang out in train stations, waiting for women. She might be the kind of person who takes men like that and rips them limb from limb with her bare hands. The man left the station without a word, and the train took me home, safe and sound. Love that. Anytime I'm on public transportation, that is the vibe I'm trying to give off, okay? I don't know what it says about me that I'm trying to channel a either mentally unhinged or possessed woman while I'm on public transportation, but that is the vibe. I think you should read this because it's really, really good. Next, we have another sleeper cell. This is one that literally someone just spontaneously ordered for me because they saw the cover and then read the synopsis and was like, I think Sam would like this. So like, very touching. But that is Nijigahara Holograph by Inio Asano. And this is like kind of hard to explain. Basically, it's about this class in Japan. And there's this like tragedy that happens when they're in school. So we kind of are switching back and forth between like when these were school children and then now that they're adults and sort of like the butterfly effect that event has had on their lives, the choices that they're making now, and how their lives have ended up. This blew me away. This definitely feels very like David Lynchian. So if you're into that kind of thing, even if you're not a manga reader, I think you should really check this out. This was one where when I finished reading it, my jaw was like on the ground. I had to process it for so long. And it's one of those reads where when you're done reading it, you're like, nobody look at me, nobody touch me, do not perceive me. And that was me for like the whole rest of the night. I really think you should check this out. Some beautiful art, a really twisted, complex, amazingly messed up story. So please read this and I hope you like it. Oh, I'm pretty proud of this one. This makes me feel really smug. So this next one is a poetry collection. Not to brag, but she reads poetry. But in all seriousness, I actually really don't. It's been hard for me to find poetry that I really, really enjoy. A lot of collections, one or two will be like, yeah, that was good. But this collection was like nourishing my soul or like ripping out my heart and stomping on it, but like in a good way. That is Your Wound, My Garden by Alakvade Manan. So they are a trans activist and writer and poet. They are really good at what they do. So I think most of this was written during like the COVID lockdown. This is a little short collection, but this packs a freaking punch. I obviously can't read you everything out of here, although I would love to, but I want to read you an excerpt from a poem that they wrote about their grandfather. Dying is the longest verb I know. In the last months of his life, I'd read to him in bed. He would inevitably fall asleep, so I'd stop. And then somehow he'd wake up every time. Sometimes I'd skip pages just to see if he'd notice. He didn't. One time I started crying as I read to him. I couldn't stop. I thought about him dying. No, I was selfish. I thought about me losing him. Becoming an orphaned metaphor with no reference point. A blue dot on a map, pulsating in the middle of gray expanse. But I kept going. The words, they were indistinguishable, like a smushed bug, and my tears punctuated the pages like they belonged, like the purpose of reading out loud is precisely to weep. He kept listening, and I'd like to think it was less about the words and more about me being the one reading them. That at the end of his life, I became that which he was for me. Flesh that finally felt as real as fiction. A hand to hold in the dark. The last sound at the end of a long, long day before rest. yeah, freaking sad, but also like, geez, that's freaking beautiful, you know? Throughout the collection, and there's also some photographs of the artist interspersed. So I think you should really check out this collection, even if you're not a poetry person, because they have a way with words. Let me just say that much. Okay, next is one that I don't have a physical copy of yet, but I asked for it for Christmas and hopefully I get it. That is Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead. I listened to this on audiobook, and the audiobook was a banger. So if you're an audiobook person, you should definitely listen to it. This was such a delight to read because our main character is this neurodivergent coded lesbian woman who originally like seeks out guidance at this Catholic church. The pastor or priest or whatever mistakenly thinks that she's there for a job interview, and then she is like unable to navigate those kind of social situations. She doesn't want to be impolite or come off as rude or make things awkward. So rather than being like, no, I'm not here for a job interview, I'm here for some spiritual guidance, she literally like goes through the interview and gets hired, and then like starts working at this church. And the reason there was an opening for the receptionist is because their old receptionist passed away unexpectedly. So on like her first day, she's like going through her work email, and she sees these emails from this woman who's like friends with the previous receptionist. And instead of emailing the woman to be like, I'm sorry to let you know the previous receptionist has passed, she's not equipped to navigate those kinds of situations, and she doesn't want to make the woman feel bad. So she just emails her back. She basically starts impersonating the previous receptionist. Yeah, it's kind of just like her fumbling through life. It's a pretty simple story, but what I really loved about this is that I just resonated so much with the main character. I think this book just came to me at the right time because I actually was diagnosed with ADHD this year. I thought that I had undiagnosed autism, but then I also realized this year that there's a lot of overlap between ADHD and autism, and especially in women. So that whole diagnosis has been really eye-opening for me. And then to read from the point of view of a main character who, again, she's not explicitly like, I have ADHD or I have autism, but she's definitely written like very neurodivergent coded. And it was just like so cool. It was so refreshing to read from the point of view of someone who also, I don't know, their brain just like goes through the same million processes that seem unrelated to the task or the conversation. I felt very seen by this book, and it made me feel a lot better about all the crazy shit that's going on in my brain, and like made me feel less crazy. I don't know if this is like objectively a 5-star banger, but this was definitely like a 5-star banger of my heart. Oh, I think this book is kind of like one of my soulmates. Made me feel very validated, was so soul nourishing, and yeah, just made me feel a little bit less alone with my like recent diagnosis and navigating all of those feelings. So that's that on that. The next one is also one that I do not yet own, but that is Paradise by Fernanda Melchor and translated by Sophie Hughes. This blew me away. This is about this like luxury gated community. It mostly follows these two teenage boys. One of them lives in the gated community, is obviously part of this really wealthy family, and has this really unhealthy obsession with porn, and his neighbor who's kind of has like mommy vibes and like ew. And then the other teenage boy is actually a gardener in the gated community. Franco is the wealthy kid, Polo is the gardener. I get the idea he's sort of like lower middle class, maybe like lower class, but he's definitely not like living in a gated community. And the only reason Polo hangs out with Franco is because Franco is just like bored and lonely. So after his work shifts, Polo will hang out with Franco, even though he doesn't even really necessarily like him that much. He just wants free booze and wants to stay out of his home. He just has a lot of like teenage angst and like teenage boy anger. But then as the story progresses, there's definitely like incel energy. You know, we got some like Andrew Tate, manosphere type vibes coming through. They're like anger, angst, and like that incel energy comes to a head at the end of the book when they act on their urges. Obviously, the main characters are loathsome people, but what I think is the genius of Fernanda Melchor is that somehow she was still able to humanize these boys. You know, there were definitely some levels where she kind of made you relate to them and even empathize with them. I'm always very deeply disturbed when that happens because it kind of makes you confront the fact that like you're not a totally good person all the time either. It's so messed up. This was such a short book and it packed such a punch. It literally was like an uppercut to the jaw in the best way possible. I cannot recommend this one enough. This was fantastic. Next is another one that I read from the library, so I don't have a physical copy yet, but I just purchased one and it is being shipped to me as we speak. That is Fever Dream by Samanta Schweblin and translated by Megan McDowell. This is one going into it I knew I would like, but dang, I didn't know I would love it so much. I literally read it in a single sitting because I was so sucked in. So this is about a woman in an Argentinian hospital who meets a young boy who's also a patient there. We're sort of told through flashbacks what brought her to this hospital. Yeah, I don't really want to say too much because it is so short. So this is based on true events, sort of. It's based on true environmental problems that occurred in Argentina and sort of the fallout of those problems. And there's elements of like psychological horror, eerie, atmospheric type horror. This wasn't like an uppercut to the jaw. This was like someone chloroformed you and then you like wake up in an unknown place with a sack on your head, but like in a good way. So yes, highly recommend this one. You should check it out. Next is one that I also read from the library, but I have since acquired a physical copy, and that is Penpal by Dathan Auerbach. Basically, this man is going back through his childhood memories to try to reconstruct his past because he remembers like something kind of weird happened when he was a kid, but he has no memory of like what really happened. This was unbelievably disturbing. I think this was really groundbreaking in that our main character, like obviously he's a grown man now, but like looking back on when things happened to him, he was like a literal kindergartner. So it's just like really disturbing to think about such horrific things and like disturbing things happening to such a young boy. Very, very creepy. So this was originally on the No Sleep subreddit. So it definitely has creepypasta vibes, but it's like, you know, like creepypastas are usually, they have a very amateur feel. This really feels polished and professional and just freaking some of the best horror I've ever read. Next is one where this was a new to me author, and I just knew from like the first few pages that this was going to be like a new fave author. So that is The Hike by Drew McGarry. This was such a fun ride. So it's this man who's on a business trip, and before his like business dinner, he decides to go on a little hike. It kind of turns into this Alice in Wonderland type fever dream. And on the back it says, a more cynical version of the Phantom Toll Booth mixed with a game of Dungeons and Dragons. And I think that is like such a great blurb because it really is. Like there are elements where it is like so funny and bizarre and weird and thought-provoking and heartwarming, but then there are parts where the stakes are pretty high and there's like true danger afoot. There were a lot of twists and turns, and then even the ending. Dang, I was not expecting that ending. So very excited to read more from this author because this was such a funny, exciting, entertaining, wild ride. Okay, we got another one that I read from the library. I'm working on acquiring a physical copy. That is Gone to See the Riverman by Kristopher Triana. This is about a woman who is in correspondence with this guy who's in prison for killing a bunch of women. And yeah, she's writing letters and she's like, I'm not like all these other groupies who become obsessed with serial killers. And then it's like, yeah, you kind of are. Anyway, he basically like sends her on this quest to go to his old cabin and then like meet up with this guy called the Riverman. So she's like, yep, I'm gonna do it. No questions asked. But she's also the primary caretaker for her older sister who is mentally disabled. So she has to take the sister with. It ends up being like this huge mess, isolated in the woods, kind of like Blair Witch vibes, but also like Texas Chainsaw vibes in that it's like you're in the middle of these nowhere woods. Just very, very creepy, very intense, very disturbing. I really liked the ending. Again, another very bleak one. So if you're not one who likes very bleak stuff, probably won't be for you. But I loved it. Okay, next we have another extremely disturbing horror book, and that is The Laws of the Skies by Gregoire Courtois, translated by Rhonda Mullins. So this is very much like Lord of the Flies, Battle Royale, but what's disturbing about this is that it's a class of 6-year-olds that head into the forest on a field trip, a little camping trip. Yep. This is not a happy ending. There is some danger afoot, and these 6-year-olds have to learn the hard way, the laws of the skies. This book did not pull any punches. This book was like, yep, I'm gonna send a group of 6-year-olds into the forest and I'm gonna massacre them. It's not ashamed of what it's trying to be. Just like so in your face, and I love it. Highly recommend this one. This is definitely very extreme though, so if you're not a gory girly, you probably won't like this, but I am. Next is one that I literally finished like 3 days ago, so I'm glad I actually waited until the end of 2022 to film this video, because otherwise this wouldn't have been able to make the list. But that is Mother Thing by Ainslie Hogarth. I know a lot of people who really didn't like this because this is heavily marketed as a horror, and it really is more of like a domestic drama and more of like a character study with a lot of horror elements. Our main character, Abby, lives with her husband, Ralph, and her mother-in-law, Laura, and they live in Laura's home because her health has been declining. Basically, from the first page of the book, we learn that Laura actually passes away and starts haunting the house, and specifically Ralph. So Abby is tasked with trying to get Ralph to get through his grief, trying to be a good wife, while also dealing with the possibility that their house may be haunted by her mother-in-law. So this was freaking funny. So this is another one where I laughed out loud several times while reading this. But then there were also some parts where it was like, damn, Ainslie Hogarth, you need to give me a little bit of warning before you get so real. But Ralph opens up about how he lives with depression. And Abby's like, can you tell me again what it feels like to be depressed? And Ralph says, it's like being dead, only without peace. Your sense of yourself, the thing in you that loves your family and your friends and, experiences joy or even pain, that thing is gone. And you're just left with your walking corpse. And it's just as dreadful as any corpse is, but it's you. You're the corpse. So yeah, my little note on this is me all the way up. So yeah, I was not ready for her to get so real, but this was fantastic. Fantastic. Again, don't go into this expecting a cold-blooded hardcore horror. This really is more of a unhinged female lead with some horror elements. Really, really good, and I think you should read it. Hi, it's the next day. I could feel myself losing steam and starting to feel really overwhelmed, so I decided to stop recording last night, and now it's next day Sam. Before I went to bed last night, I was like, oh, it'll be fine. I'll just do the same makeup, wear the same outfit, and do my hair the same, and then just pretend that I'm just continuing. But then when I woke up this morning, I was like, is that crazy? And it felt kind of crazy. So I decided to stick with the same hairstyle for some continuity. But yeah, we have different makeup and different dress. And for those of you who are new to the channel, I wish I could promise you that I'm not usually this all over the place and unhinged, but that would be a lie. So I completely understand if you have to bow out now, and thanks for clicking, and I will probably never see you again. But listen, I never promised to hide my crazy here, so it's just all part of the process. So without further ado, let's get into my top 6 books of 2022. Okay, next is, I'm kind of cheating because this is a manga series that I've read this year. It's my number 6, and that is Blood on the Tracks by Shuzo Oshimi. Just from this cover, it's shouldn't be eerie and unnerving, but there's just something kind of unnerving about this picture. So I think the art in this is just freaking amazing, and it really lends itself well to the subject matter. So this is definitely a psychological family drama, and it all kicks off in the first volume when an extended family goes on this hiking trip and an unexpected accident occurs. And then we're sort of following the butterfly effect of that singular accident and how it affects this really tight family unit. As I said, the art is just phenomenal, eerie, breathtaking in its beauty, but also in the emotions it's portraying, often negative emotions. It's also breathtaking in a scary way. It feels like there's ice in your veins and you can't breathe and your stomach drops. It's that kind of holy shit. I just think it's so effective. I know I say this often on my channel, but I think even if you're not a manga person, you're not a graphic novel person, if you are a horror person, or I think even if you just really like a good psychological drama, this is some of the best of the best. And I think if you say you don't want to read it because it's a manga, you're really losing out on a lot of amazing books. And that is why I have opted to collect this series. I don't collect a lot of series, but this one just demanded to be read and to be collected. So yes, please read this. At least give the first volume a shot and tell me if you like it. All right, now we're getting into the top 5. So if you've been around for a while, you'll probably be able to guess these top 5, but number 5 is Slewfoot by Brom. This is one where the internet is foaming at the mouth over this one. This is a booktube, bookstagram, book talk darling. And I'm happy to report that for once, I actually agree. This absolutely lived up to the hype. This was everything that I wanted, and everything I wanted that I didn't even know I wanted, you know? We follow Abatha, and she's living in this colony in Connecticut in 1666, and she's very much like a free-spirited woman who doesn't want her life to be ruled by someone else, let alone a stinky man, and clearly that doesn't go well for her because it's 1666. Basically, her days are numbered. This demon called Slewfoot, which is like pretty much the devil, he's like awakened in the woods near their colony, and he doesn't remember who he is or like the powers he has, and he kind of just like wants peace, you know? He like just wants to chill. He really didn't want to be like woken from his slumber, but his little like wild folk woke him up, and then he meets Abatha, and they kind of like strike up this acquaintanceship, which like leads to a friendship. And then as their friendship grows and he sees her struggling, he's really trying to like help her survive in this community and try and avoid violence if possible. But of course, as I said, being a woman with an opinion in 1666 was enough to get you burnt at the stake, so they're not really successful in their goal to not resort to violence, but I'm totally okay with that. I think I said this in my August wrap-up too, that this is like a witchy version of The Punisher. So I think obviously if you like witchy stuff, witchy horror, the satisfaction of women not having to conform to white male patriarchal standards, you like revenge stories, if you like any or all of those things, this is just going to be like a double-handed slam dunk for you. So if you haven't read this already, like what are you doing? This is just fantastic. So this was kind of interesting to me because I read this first and then I read Krampus second, and they're both by Brom. Obviously loved this. This is number 5 on my best books of 2022 out of 154 books that I read. Krampus was one of my worst books of 2022 because it was so disappointing compared to Slewfoot. Read Slewfoot, maybe skip Krampus. You can check out my thoughts on that on my worst books of 2022. I loved this so much. So I just want to leave you with a little blurb from the synopsis that has just really stuck with me, and I just love the energy. It says, "If it is a devil you seek, then it is a devil you shall have." So yes, please read this. It's very good. So now on to number 4. Number 4 is one that I also listened to on audiobook and have not yet acquired a physical copy of. That is The Devil All the Time by Donald Ray Pollock. I didn't know if I was gonna like this because I thought it would kind of have like thriller vibes, which it like to some degree did. There definitely were like some high stakes. This story takes place in Ohio and West Virginia, and we're sort of sequentially introduced to all of these different characters in somewhat of a vacuum. But then as we get to know the characters more and the plot develops, they become more and more interconnected. It's kind of hard to describe the plot because it is so like interwoven, and I don't want to spoil that for you, but I will say there's like a guy who has just come back from war and he unexpectedly meets the love of his life and they start a family together. So we follow him, and then eventually we start following his son as well. And then we follow a couple who love to road trip around, and they happen to be serial killers who pick up hitchhikers and do their thing with the hitchhikers. There's a pastor who claims to be so faithful that he actually like dumps spiders on his head to prove that he's loyal to God and he believes that God will protect him. There's a ton of characters. It is such a rich tapestry of a book. I think this is probably one of the best plot-driven books I've read this year, but also the characters. I really loved all of the characters. The characters all felt very real to me. I loved it. Knocked my socks off. So dang, yeah, this was so good. I've never read any Donald Ray Pollock before this, so I will absolutely be reading everything I can get my grubby mitts onto of his because he is just a very, very gifted writer. I will absolutely be picking up a physical copy of this once I can find a hardcover for not a super expensive price. You should read it. Okay, next is one that I actually listened to on audiobook, which was delightful because it was read by the author. And I have since acquired a physical copy, so that's why it's not annotated, but I do plan to reread this in 2023 and annotate it. This is one of the funniest books I read in 2022 and perhaps have ever read. So that is The First Bad Man by Miranda July. Miranda July is a new author I found this year. She's also a filmmaker, screenwriter. She's one of those authors where you're like, how does your mind exist? her mind is just so insane to me in like the most amazing way. I don't know how the frick she comes up with her ideas. I don't know how she comes up with the sentences that she writes. She's just so effortlessly funny and entertaining. She's a certified weird girl. So this is about, the synopsis is so weird. So like, I recommend this if you like weird books. Just like, let yourself go. Let yourself be taken by the book, okay? Let it take you for the ride. Don't ask questions. Don't ask to stop for a bathroom break. Just be taken along for the ride, okay? Our main character is, again, she's kind of like neurodivergent coded. She works at this women's self-defense nonprofit, and then her bosses ask if their 20-year-old daughter can come live with her, because they're like, she's really a handful, we don't want to deal with her anymore. And our main character, Cheryl, is kind of like strong-armed into taking the daughter. Oh yeah, this is gonna be fine. It's kind of like her like struggling through having this new roommate. She has a crush on this guy who thinks that's like her soulmate. She thinks that there's this like spirit of a baby, her long-lost baby, and it keeps like showing up to her in different vessels and like different bodies in her life. It's freaking weird, okay? I don't know how to describe it in like normie terms, but again, if any of that kind of piqued your interest, freaking read this, okay? This was laugh out loud funny. And again, if you're an audiobook girly, listen to the audiobook because Miranda July narrates it and she is so funny. She is a special lady, a 1 in a million mind, okay? If you're willing to try some weird stuff, let's get weird, okay? You came to this channel to get weird, so let's get weird. Okay, now we're on to number 2. Can't believe it, we've come so far. You probably know what my top 2 are, but like, I'm gonna talk about them again anyway. So coming in at number 2 is the manhwa series, Killing Stalking. So I read this in January. This set the tone for the year, let me tell ya. So this is a Korean manhwa series written by Koogi, and this was originally published on Lezhin Comics and has since been picked up by 7 Seas and has these physical releases of these deluxe editions, which are just gorgeous. This is a very graphic, violent, extreme series. So I really can't show you a ton inside, but it's full color, which is very rare and very expensive to do. So these are really great collector's pieces. This is about a young man named Yoonbum who is very like insecure. He's very much like loner vibes, and he is obsessed with this guy Sang-woo who he has a crush on. He's had a crush on since high school. So he basically starts stalking Sang-woo, and one day he is able to break into Sang-woo's apartment while Sang-woo is away, and he learns that Sang-woo is maybe not as much of a good boy as he sort of like built up in his mind. So we actually learn over the course of the story that Sang-woo is a pretty messed up guy. And then he basically imprisons Yoonbum in his home, and there's a lot of like torture, psychological horror, and the author, the way she draws the characters, and again, this is like similar vibes to Shuzo Oshimi in that the way that they're able to capture human emotion on the page in a static image and be able to unnerve you with a single image is, there's just nothing like it. It's amazing. The way that she draws Sang-woo's face, he is like a genuinely very scary, intimidating person. This is very, very intense. A lot of graphic, gory, awful things happening in this. It's not just total splatterpunk either. There is really a lot of substance to this story because over the course of the story, we learn more about Yoonbum's past and sort of like the traumas he's endured. And then we also learn more about Sang-woo's past and the trauma he endured as well. But what I like about it is that it's written in a way that it's not like, here's his past, he should kind of like get a break because he had a really tough past. It's more just to inform you. I think that Sang-woo and Yoonbum together are a really interesting dynamic as characters because they both endured separate traumas and they both have turned out similar in some ways, but then also like radically different in some ways. So this idea of unresolved trauma being weaponized to traumatize others, but kind of unknowingly, and then also the contrast of like how trauma can affect people differently and have different outcomes for different people was really interesting. And this is the very binge-worthy series. So this is already completed on Lezhin Comics. So if you want to, you could be like me and go and binge the whole series in like one sitting on Lezhin Comics. And then you should also purchase the physical copies to have because these are fantastic. So again, this is one I can't recommend to everyone because I know it's not going to be for everyone. But if you are into extreme horror, you don't mind a little bit of smut, you don't mind a little bit of gore and graphic things happening, you might like this. So maybe check it out. Okay, last but not least, we have my number one spot. I'm gonna take a moment of silence for those of you who have been watching for a while to try and guess what this book is. Okay, I feel like Dora the Explorer now, like waiting for you to respond. So that book is, of course, Threats by Amelia Gray. This book quite literally rearranged my chromosomes. This singular book made me rethink who I am as a reader. This was like a reading reset for me. This had everything I didn't even know I needed. I ended up reading it twice this year. First time I listened to it on audiobook, which was fantastic. That narrator was amazing. And then I, of course, read a physical copy and annotated the shit out of it because I made a review video about it, which looking back, I'm not super happy with the review video because I was still so new to booktube. And I think that I've gotten better about articulating my thoughts in some ways. I can already tell I'm gonna wanna reread again next year because even just flipping through it again to prepare for this video, I was like getting sucked in again. I just wanted to read it. There's just something about her writing that's so, it's like it was written for me. It's similar to Miranda July in that it's like very absurd. Amelia Gray's mind, it seems like such a foreign entity to me. Her mind is on a completely different plane of reality. It's amazing. It's like every single word in this book was so carefully chosen, and it's so absurd and funny, but also really eerie and disconcerting at the same time. I think people who don't like this probably didn't like it because it was really marketed as a pretty standard thriller. This guy's wife dies. He seems like a really unreliable narrator. He doesn't really remember what happened to her. He doesn't really know why she had to leave. And then he mysteriously starts receiving all of these weird threats in all of these weird locations, like in his sugar bowl, mixed in with his like wife's old toiletries and things like that. And these threats are just so unnerving. So here's one of them. Your fate is sealed with glue I have boiled in a vat. I slopped it on an envelope and mailed it to your mother's womb. Very weird, but also there's just something so creepy and unnerving about that. Wow. I'm still to this day so bowled over by how amazing this was. Again, very, very weird. I think a couple people have read this based on my recommendation, and it's not clear to me if they really liked it that much. So sorry if you read this because I said I really liked it and you didn't like it. But if you're the type of person who can just surrender yourself to the book, let it take you where it wants to take you, and appreciate it for what it is, then I think this book could take you to some really exciting, weird places. I will say there's a lot of ambiguity in this book. There aren't really a lot of like concrete questions answered, which I think is another complaint by a lot of people, but just go in with an open mind. I think you'll know pretty quickly if the writing is for you or not, because I immediately from like the first chapter was like, this lady's weird and I love her and I kind of want to be her and I want to have a drink with her and I want her to like read me bedtime stories. Amelia Gray could like write me a grocery list and it would probably make my top 10 books of the year. So I cannot rant and rave about this book enough. I already own a physical copy, and every time I go to a bookstore, I always look to see if it's at a bookstore because I just want to like pick it up and look at it and fawn over it. I just love it. So if you're interested in an even more in-depth analysis of my love of this book, you could check out my review video. Again, I was still really early on in booktube, so in hindsight, there are some different things I would do, but also my DMs are open. So if you want to talk more about this book, would love to. If you want to do a buddy read of this, any excuse I could have to reread this book, I will. So let me know. Okay, I think I'm done. Talking about it, but I love it. I love it so much. All right, guys, those are the 22 best books that I read in 2022. I loved these all very much, and I hope that if you read them, you do too. Yeah, let me know if you guys have read any of these or are wanting to read any of these. Let me know if you read any of these and you really didn't like them. I'm always really intrigued to know if and why people really didn't like books that I like too. So yeah, I really appreciate you guys so much. I feel like this year was full of some of my highest highs and some of my lowest lows. So I really appreciate you all for sticking around with me. It was really a great comfort to always have books to fall back onto and this wonderful community of people that we are continuously building. I just never thought that I would meet some of the nicest people in the world on this small microcosm of the internet, but I'm really glad I did. So I really appreciate you guys for being here. Welcome to anyone who's new. I know I've been kind of MIA for the last few weeks, but I am feeling a bit better, and I can't promise it won't happen again because your girl is mentally ill, but I am doing my best, and that's all that anyone can hope for. So thank you again. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm really happy you're here. I'm really happy I'm here, and I can't always say that every day. So I'm really happy we're here together. So thank you so much for being here. You can watch my other videos if you want, like this video. Again, comment your thoughts down below. Subscribe if you want, if I haven't already scared you off. Would love to have ya. And look forward to my tier ranking every book I read in 2022 video. And I love you guys so much, and I'll see you and goodbye.